Hello, and welcome to my channel. This is the Historian of Truth channel. I am your host, T-Hot. And just to give you a background on me, I have an MA, a master's degree in history. I have written a book along with several journal articles, scholarly journal articles, and book reviews of historical works on my resume, and I taught history for almost a decade at the high school and college level. So history is something that I love, and I am going to be using this channel to bring up interesting history topics. There will be discussions on things such as um, books about history, uh, just going through history lessons, like maybe a history of the Roman Empire, political historical topics and debates, and just overall history. And it's just something I love, and pop culture history. And one of the first video I thought I would do for this channel is one that looks like is a fun video to talk about. And what I do is I entitle this my thesis on this, "The Dude Abides: The Big Lebowski as an Allegory for the 1960s and the Vietnam War." Okay. Now, many subjects have been, or people have discussed the Big Lebowski. Some have mentioned this as a possible topic, but they've never really looked at it in depth like I am going to examine this movie today. Okay. And the Big Lebowski, in my view, the Coen brothers who made this film did it as an allegory for the Vietnam War in the 1960s. Maybe about 50 years ago or so, a historian, either literary historian or somebody, brought up the fact that the movie the book The Wizard of Oz was actually about the populist movement and the politics of the United States in the late 1890s and early 1900s, and how every person in there represented something along the populist movement. And I may discuss that topic in a later video. But I think here it's very similar, that that the Big Lebowski is actually an allegory for the 1960s and the Vietnam War. And I'm going to go through all the characters, all the events, and discuss how it relates to the 1960s and how the little hidden things in there actually bring out the hidden meanings, bring it out, and when you see it, it will all make sense to you. Okay? So we're just going to go over the basic story of the Big Lebowski. The Big Lebowski deals with these three friends. One's named the Dude, or Jeffrey Lebowski. One is Walter Sobchak, and the other is Donnie. And they are friends who like to bowl. Well, one day, after it appears, after bowling, the or Jeff, or the Dude, I'll call him, or Jeffrey Lebowski, gets attacked by these people who are looking for money for him. But he ends up finding out, they found out they're in the wrong house. And there's another man with the same name, Jeffrey Lebowski, who owes money. Well, the Dude, he's called the Dude, Jeffrey Lebowski. He played by Jeff Bridges. He goes to the other Jeffrey Lebowski looking for payment for his rug, because apparently, or during the time, one of the guys urinated on his rug. And so the Jeffrey Lebowski does not want to pay him, but eventually calls him back when his wife is supposedly kidnapped, and they need a person to drop off the money to the kidnappers so that he can get his wife back from the kidnappers. And after this, it just leads, it's a comedy movie, and it just leads to all this kind of zaniness and chaos, and it's a lot of fun. It's very funny. um, there's a lot of jokes in there, and eventually what they find out was it was all a ruse, and nobody was ever really kidnapped, and things like that. And it's just very funny. It's a very funny movie. And initially, when it came out in 1998, It wasn't a very big hit. I remember, I only remember seeing the previews for it. I didn't go see it. But I remember about 3 years later, a friend of mine showed me this movie, and I remember watching it and thinking, I really didn't like it the first time I watched it. I was like, not that bad. But then a few months later, I watched it again. I said, hey, this is actually kind of pretty funny. And then the next thing I knew about, I was in college around 2002, around that time. All of a sudden, people at college were quoting this movie after it had come out on video, on DVD and everything else, and it became a really popular thing to the point where they have festivals now. They've got a religion for this. People quote this movie, and it's become iconic now, 27 years later, when at the time nobody really saw it. So, but what is going on in this movie is the Coen brothers have cleverly used this ruse, this comedy movie, to basically tell us about the 1960s and what they thought of it. And I'm going to go through all of it right now. I may miss some things, but I thought this would be an interesting topic to start off this channel, the first video. First of all, we have Jeffrey Lebowski, or the Dude. The Dude is obvious when you see him. He's a representation of the hippie culture of the 1960s. He's lazy. He does drugs. He's not really caring about how he dresses. He doesn't concern himself with money, which is kind of ironic because when the other Lebowski, the rich Lebowski, offers him to be the bag man for delivering the money for the kidnapping, he's all of a sudden caring about money. He cares that that they offered him, I think it was $20,000. All of a sudden now he cares about money. But he didn't care about money. He can't make his rent. He doesn't have a job. He's unemployed. We know that he's a representation of the hippies because uh, he mentions in the movie that he wrote the Port Huron Statement, which was a left-wing statement of their ideals and these sorts of things in the 60s. And he told another person that he spent most of the 60s in college occupying administrative buildings. Well, what was that? That was the hippie culture. The hippie culture took over the administrative buildings and colleges and protest of the Vietnam War and for free speech and against racism and against feminism. I mean, against women's rights and these sorts of things. So you can see he's a representation. He has no structure, no direction. He only cares about himself and his own hedonistic desires. That's a representation of what the hippies did. A lot of them did not care. They were just only looking after what they wanted. Okay? He quotes, and a lot of the hippies were very, very left wing. Some of them were communist. He quotes Lenin, Vladimir Lenin. He tries to quote him, doesn't quite get through that. He drinks a white Russian, you know. What are the Russians? The Russians were communist, which is what what a lot of hippies supported. A lot of them turned out to be communists. Like you used an example of Angela Davis, for example, during that time, a lot of them became communists, and a lot in that hippie movement, they became communists, or they were supportive of the North Vietnamese when we were fighting the Vietnam War. And all the time, he only wants peace as much as possible. There are several scenes where he's trying to calm things down. He's trying to regulate peace between Walter and another guy who's bowling, and they're arguing over who stepped over the line. When the guy drags him from that car and puts him into the Big Lebowski's limousine, he's like, hey, calm down, I've got a beverage here. Hey, calm down. And when the nihilists attack him towards the end of the movie, he's trying to pay them money. He's like, hey, I don't want to fight. He's pacifist. That's a representation of that hippie culture. They were all pacifist. And they were all communist. And so you can kind of see this, that the Dude is just a representation of the hippie culture. Okay? Now, Walter, on the other hand, his friend, one of his bowling buddies, he is a representation of the right-wing Vietnam vet. Okay, the guy that served in the war, he makes no bones about it. He tells everybody that he can that he served in Vietnam. He tells everybody that he served in Vietnam. Doesn't matter who it is. He makes sure everybody knows. It's obvious that it's obvious that he has some form of PTSD about this. He comes back from the war. He's a representation of the Vietnam vet, the right-wing Vietnam vets who come back and don't seem nobody seems to care about them. Nobody seems to listen to them. Nobody seems even the Big Lebowski at the end says, "Who is this guy?" And Walter goes, "Who am I?" He goes, "I'm a veteran. That's what I am." You see, they're like the forgotten people of that war. They were kind of like the forgotten people, and that's what he represents. And and he's one of these guys. He says he cares about the rule. Is kind of ironic. He cares. He says he cares about the rules of bowling in one way when one of their opponents in a bowling league, he was bowling and he stepped over the line, and he told him, he said, stepped over the line, these are rules to the game, but then pulls out a gun on the floor. I know that's against the law, and he's threatening to kill him over this. That's against the law. See, he says he cares about the rules but doesn't really. That's that PTSD. He's very aggressive. He's insulting. He's rude. Okay? He cares about his rights. This is something Walter really cares about, that right wing thing. And he cares about his rights. And what does he say? He talks of he starts getting loud in one scene at the diner. He's yelling, and a lady asks him to keep it down, please. And he tells him, he's like, I have, that the Supreme Court has rejected prior restraint, meaning he has free speech. That represents the free speech movement. That's the free speech movement that happened in the 1960s. It happened on campuses when they tried to quell free speech. The right wing and the left wing kind of came together in agreement of free speech. Okay, does that make sense? So you can see that Walter is a representation of that Vietnam vet who came back a little bit forgotten, a little bit more aggressive and with PTSD, and was very, very concerned with his rights, and seems to be very supportive of the war, these sorts of things. Okay, now there's a third member of this trio, and his name is Donnie. Okay, now Donnie is is he is a representation of what's known as what Richard Nixon called the silent majority. Okay, he's a representation of the silent majority. Who is the silent majority? Richard Nixon, when he ran in 1968, was trying to appeal to what he called the silent majority. He was appealing to the average American, the silent majority, who pays their taxes, who goes to work, who raises their family, who goes to church. They're not causing any trouble. Okay, not like the hippies who are just who are protesting all the time, and the people that are the Vietnam vets who are coming back and clashing with the hippies and all of this thing. These are your average Americans. Okay, how do we know Donnie is the representation of the silent majority? Because throughout the film, Walter is always telling him to shut up. He tells him, shut up, Donnie. Every time Donnie tries to express himself or talk to him, he tells him, shut up. Shut up. You're the silent majority. You be quiet. And notice it's Walter that's telling him to do that, because most of the silent majority was in the middle, maybe a little bit conservative to the right of center. And he has no he's kind of right of center, but basically the right winger, Walter, is speaking for him, is trying to make him be quiet and speak for him and make him more right wing and more radicalized. You see, he doesn't want him talking. He should be the voice of reason, the silent majority, the average American, the voice of reason, but he's not. He's not the voice of reason. He's the guy, he's talking. He's cool, he's cool, calm. Your average guy, you look at the way he dresses. Walter dresses very militaristic. The dude dresses like a hippie, is not very kept up. Donnie is always dressed in a nice collared shirt, like the average American going to their job, working, and then coming home, you know. He has no strong personality, no real convictions of this. Okay. And the interesting part is that he's this representation. And the interesting thing is after the whole movie's over and all the chaos that's gone on in the film, Donnie dies. Donnie dies. Not Jeffrey Lebowski, not anybody else. Only Donnie dies. Why? Because the 1960s and 70s destroyed the average American who pays their taxes, goes to work. That silent majority was basically killed during the 1960s and 70s. Nobody thought of them. They disappeared. They died. They will seek a resurgence again in the 80s and 90s, which we'll talk about in a few minutes in this video. But they die in the end. They were the ones hurt. The average American was the ones hurt by the craziness caused by all of these people during the 60s and 70s. Okay, the hippies, the promoters of Vietnam and the Vietnam War, and all of this, they were hurt by this. Okay, so I hope you see that. So Donnie's a representation of the silent majority. He's told to be quiet. All right. Now, the Big Lebowski, Jeffrey Lebowski, the rich millionaire, okay, he is a representation of the rich people who supported the war in Vietnam and do not care about the average Americans. He doesn't care that he has placed the dude in harm's way possibly by delivering this money. He doesn't care. And then Walter comes in unknowingly, and because of all of this chaos that he caused, he's caused this problem, and Donnie ends up dying because of all of this. Donnie ends up being killed because of the games. He's the rich person who his children don't get involved with this. He doesn't put his daughter through this. He's drafting the Big Lebowski into this. Does that make sense? He's drafting him in. He's drafting him. And because of that, Jeffrey's friends get involved, and the average American ends up getting hurt. Okay, he doesn't care about the average American. Okay, he gets them involved in the kidnapping scheme, which could have gotten them killed. The irony part is he's not really rich. Like I said, during this thing, his daughter doesn't get involved. If he had a son, the son's not involved in this. So they're not involved in retrieving this money and being put in harm's way. The dude is drafted into this, okay? He's not really rich. He was given his money through his deceased wife. So what is he? He launders money. What is him? What is he? He's like Nelson Rockefeller, the Kennedys, the Romneys, all of these big family names of people, okay? That's who he is. He is a representation of them. Nelson Rockefeller was given he had a lot of money, wealth through his family. The Kennedys had a lot of wealth through their families. You see, this Lebowski, the Big Lebowski, he never got his money legitimately. It was given to him through his deceased wife. His daughter Maud tells Jeffrey about this. Okay, so he doesn't really have any money. Okay, just like the Kennedys. Kennedys don't really have any money like they've really earned, and so that's what he represents. And we're going to talk about how him and the dude are actually very similar later in this video. Even though they share the same name, they're very, very similar in that. So he's like a representation of like the Nelson Rockefellers, or the Kennedys and all this, who support the war, who cause all this chaos, and the average American suffers because of it, because that's what uh, the dude Walter and Donnie represent. They represent the average American. Okay, his right hand man is a man named Brandt. He's played by Philip Seymour Hoffman. Brandt is a sycophant. He represents the sycophant politician who does all the bidding of the rich elitist. So the rich elitist, like they say, go to war in Vietnam. So the politician obliges and says, okay, we're going to go to the war in Vietnam. So he does whatever they want him to do. He's the sycophant politician, all right, who's basically bought out by them, all right. He echoes their ideas and sentiments. So he's the politician who echoes the ideas and sentiments to them, to the people, like the dude, from what the Lebowski tells him. He represents the politicians who are supportive of the war in Vietnam and the chaos that ensues. So that's what he is. He just kind of always, if you watch Brandt, he always repeats what the Big Lebowski says, and these sorts of things. So that's what he represents. Now the Big Lebowski, Jeffrey Lebowski, the millionaire, has a wife, and she's a young trophy wife, and her name is Bunny. And what she represents is the free love movement of the 1960s. She is a pornographic actress who jumps from partner to partner, hence like a rabbit. That's why her name is Bunny. Okay? She jumps from partner to partner. Okay? That's what they did in the 1960s. It was free love with the birth control pill. There didn't seem to be there didn't seem to be any consequences right there. She owes money to her boss named Jackie Treehorn, and she disappears but faces absolutely no consequences for this. And that's what the free love movement thought they were going to do, was they were just going to be able to have sex with as many partners as they want to, and not face any consequences like STDs, pregnancies, these sorts of things. So it's, they have sex with no consequences. So that's what Bunny represents, his wife represents the free love movement of the 1960s, the jumping from partner to partner. Okay. Now, Jeffrey Lebowski has a daughter named Maud, and she's very obvious the feminist. She represents the feminist movement of the 1960s and early 70s. She ends up uh, having a sexual relationship with Jeffrey Lebowski, wanting to get pregnant but not wanting a father figure in there. You see, that's a feminist trait, is they wanted to have children and wanted to be single mothers to prove that mothers could raise children on their own. They didn't need a man in the relationship. So they wanted to have it without a father figure. Okay. She only sees the men she only sees Jeffrey Lebowski as good for procreation and nothing else. She is also repelled by Bunny, her dad's second wife. She's repelled by him. Many in the feminist movement were not pleased with the free love movement, and especially pornography, because they thought it exploited women, and it turned women into sex objects. Okay, so she does not like Bunny. Okay, she does not like Bunny, the Big Lebowski's second wife, because it's just like what the feminists did. They don't like women being exploited for money like that and being exploited as sex objects. And that's what Bunny was. She was a pornographic actress. And so that's a representation of how the feminists did not like the objectification of women. All right. And Maud is also against her father. So once again, here's another person in the equation. She's like a fourth person. She's not in the movie a whole lot. She's in it some, but she is she's in it as a representation of the feminist movement. Okay, and now she's down there in this as well. There's a scene in there. It's a pretty funny scene where Jeffrey Lebowski is in the cab. He's in a cab, and the cab driver is an African American who gets very upset when Jeffrey asks him to change the station because he didn't like the music, and he's a representation of the Black Power movement. He was aggressive, very violent, kind of like the race riots. They went from, especially in the later 60s, they went from Martin Luther King, turn the other cheek, nonviolent protest, to very violent protest, the Black Power movement, the race riots in the cities, and that's what he represents in there. You can kind of see him, and I think he's even wearing like African garb in there, and a lot of them did that during that time period. Okay, and just kind of give you all a thing. This movie does take place around 1991, so it's about 25 years, 20 years after this. Now, um, uh, Bunny is employed. Her employer as a pornographic actress is a guy named Jackie Treehorn. Jackie Treehorn is a representation of Hollywood's move to more risque and degenerate movies. Jackie Treehorn talks about how he's trying to make art, and the dude kind of makes fun of it, saying, well, which one is this pornographic movie, and stuff like that. So what happened is, in the 1960s, the ratings board, or the moral board, is I think what they called it, it was disbanded for ratings. So movies in the 60s started getting more violent. You can even see it in the 70s with things like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with more like exploitation films. It got to be more sex and more vulgar, and allowed more nudity, and the movies just kind of degenerated down. And that's what Jackie Treehorn represents. It's kind of like that twist from there. Okay. Alrighty. So then we have the narrator. Okay, the narrator is played by Sam Elliott, and what he represents is the Western conservative and liberty people like politicians like Barry Goldwater of the 1960s. Okay, you can see it. He dresses up in a cowboy hat. He looks like a Westerner that's in Texas or Arizona or New Mexico or parts of California. So they're more of liberty people. He even tells the dude, he says, "I like your style." Well, what does that mean? Well, the dude was the hippies were protesting the government, protesting war. They were standing up for their rights, rights of free speech, rights of assembly, these sorts of things. And the conservative people, a lot of people that moved out west, if you know that back back 100 years before all this, they were trying to move away from government. They were a lot of Jeffersonian people. They wanted the government away from them as much as possible and let them have liberty, let them do what they wanted to do. Let them own a gun, let them gamble if they want to, or that's why prostitution houses were very popular and these sorts of things. So you can see that, and so he digs his style. So they were, so it's like saying the Western people dig, they kind of can see what the hippies are doing, but he eventually says, but you have to curse so much. That's like the Western guy saying, the Western libertarians agree with the ideals of the hippies, but they don't like the way that they handled it and the craziness that ensued from it. You know, they because they wanted to stand up for their rights, but in the same way they wanted more government control. And so like it's almost like the Western libertarians were torn between, well, we like the fact they're standing up for their rights here, but we don't want a big government. So it's like what the narrator's saying is, I dig your style, but I don't agree with your methods. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So then the question becomes, there's one thing that all three, that Donnie, it's amazing. You have three people that represents three different ways of America. They have all different views. Donnie's the rep, he's kind of like the average American. Walter's the white right-wing conservative who wants to, who loves the Vietnam War, wants the fighting, and Jeffrey Lebowski's the pacifist hippie. They don't seem to be, they seem to be a very eclectic group. It's like, why are y'all together? Well, there's one thing that they all three like to do, and that's bowling. Okay. What does bowling represent? Okay, in this movie, bowling represents America and its ideals. Because bowling brings together all the groups of people. Like America and its ideals brings all Americans together of all different political backgrounds, socioeconomic, political, gender, all the ethnic backgrounds. So bowling brings together all the sectors of America of these three people. It brings them together, it makes them one. If you look at the pins in bowling, what are two of the colors? Two are red and white. Which red, white, and blue? That's the color of the flag. Okay, it brings them all together. It's something that they all agree on, something they all enjoy and like. You see what happens in bowling, the pins can be knocked down. The pins are knocked down, but they're always reset. And that's just like what happens. In the 60s and 70s, the pins were knocked down. America was destroyed, almost destroyed. It was knocked down. But the 80s and 90s, it was set back up. Does that make sense? They were set back up. All right? And if you ever look at a bowling alley, what's on two sides of the bowling alley? Well, they're gutters on the far left and the far right of the lane. There are gutters. Okay? That's what happened in the 60s and 70s. Our country was in the gutter because we went too far to the extremes of politics. If you go too far left, if you go left wing and you go too far right wing, you're going to lead America into the gutter. So what the Coens are saying is, what's the best way to lead America? It's down the center. How are you going to get that strike when you bowl? It's down the center. Maybe a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. You can hit that front pin, but it's got to be a little bit, so you can be a little bit center right or a little bit center left. That's what is going to make America thrive. If you go in too far to the left or you go too far to the right, the country is going to end up in the gutter. That's what's going to happen. Okay? So, if you go too far that way, if you go too far right, you could have somebody like Barry Goldwater. He was so far right wing. Okay? But then you could go too far to the left. That's like the communist socialists. That's like the George McGoverns or the Angela Davises or those radicals. So you go too far right or too far left. What the Coens are saying is America needs to be right down the center. Okay, and that's what happens by 1990. What do we, when this movie takes place, 1991? What happens? Who's president? George H.W. Bush. He's a moderate Republican, just a little bit to the right. Does that make sense? And America seems to be thriving and seems to be fine. The same thing with Ronald Reagan. He was right, but he wasn't too far right. So America was okay. We were doing right, you know. Bill Clinton in the later 90s, he was moderate left. So the country was doing okay. You see, the country does well when it's right down the middle. That's where you hit the strikes. That's where you get that thing when you throw. That's one of the things, one of the dream sequences that the Big Lebowski has in the movie. It's called gutter balls. Why? Because the country was in the gutter. That's what happened. You see, the country was running in the gutter. It was going crazy with all of the free sex and the hippies taking over things and the riots and the right wingers, you know, and the riots and all. Everything was just, it was too far out there. But but it was brought back in the 80s and 90s. It's just so ironic, just a little thing that you don't understand if you don't watch it. At the beginning part, when the dude is writing his check, I don't know if this was on purpose, I don't know, but when he was writing his check, the date he dated the check was September the 11th of 1991. Which is just weird because 10 years to the day was the September 11th tax. I don't know if there's anything behind that. I just thought it was very interesting. Okay. Now here's the one thing that's interesting. Watching the bowling thing of the three friends, only Donnie is showed bowling. The Walter is shown with the ball in his hand and him approaching the lane, but we never see what he does. Donnie is the only one. He's throwing the strikes all the time. Donnie is throwing strikes every time except for that last one, but he almost threw one. You see, he almost threw one. Why? Because Donnie represents the silent majority, the average American, the moderate. So he's winning the game. He's making things right. He almost always gets the strike. Donnie's the one shown because that's what they're saying is the Coens are saying is the ideal, the average American, the moderate, the maybe slightly right or slightly left. He's the one always getting the strikes. We never see Jeff Bridges as the dude or Walter throwing a strike or throwing the ball. We only see Walter do it barely. But Donnie's the one always shown. So what does that mean? That means the silent majority. They're the ones who should be running America. The moderate people should be the ones in charge, not listening to the crazy left winger, the dude, not listening to the crazy right winger, um, uh, a Walter, but listening to Donnie, the silent majority, the man down the middle. That's who should be there. Okay, does that make sense? So that's what America represents. Just some other little tidbits of this. Um, some things to notice in the movie. Both presidents that led America during the 60s and early 70s during the Vietnam War are mentioned. For example, there's a scene where they threaten, where these group of people threaten to cut off the dude's private area, and they say they are going to cut off his Johnson. Okay, well, who was president? Lyndon Johnson. Okay, Lyndon Johnson was president. LBJ was the president who led us into Vietnam. And what's another term for Johnson? It's the name Dick. You know, we'll say it's another name for the word Richard. And Richard Nixon was the other president. Richard Nixon is also seen in a poster behind the Big Lebowski when he's in his apartment. And what is Richard Nixon doing? He's bowling. Okay, Richard Nixon was mentioned there, but Richard Nixon also went by the name Dick. He went by the name Dick Nixon. Johnson, Dick, it's all mentioned there. Okay, so you can see that both presidents are mentioned there. The Coen brothers are making a point with this about the 60s and 70s. Okay, the movie is what? If you had to categorize the movie, The Big Lebowski is a comedy. That's what they're saying. They're saying that whole era of the 60s and 70s in America was one big joke. It was a big joke. All that chaos in the U.S. and everything that it caused, it was one big joke. It was a big joke on America. It was just silly in everything that they were doing. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, like I said, the movie takes place in 1991. By that point, a moderate Republican, George H.W. Bush, is president, and the U.S. is back to being strong when it's not being radicalized. Okay, you see, all these radical people were the ones causing all the chaos. You see, they were causing all the chaos. So when the moderate gets back into charge, the silent majority, Donnie, you know, out he dies during the 60s, but out of his ashes, his ashes are spread. Out of his ashes rises people like Ronald Reagan, who's a little bit conservative but not radically conservative, and then George Bush, who's a moderate Republican, and then Bill Clinton, who's a moderate Democrat. Out of them, they recognize the silent majority. People start ignoring the left wing and ignoring the right wing and focusing on being in the middle, in the moderate. That's what it's going on. So George H.W. Bush is a moderate Republican. After him is a moderate Democrat. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? During there's a group of nihilists, German nihilists. Okay? Nihilism doesn't believe anything. They believe that the government the nihilists represent the chaos of the 1960s and 70s and the lies that ensued. They claimed to have kidnapped Bunny, but they really didn't. They pretended that they did, but they really didn't kidnap her. Okay? They really did not kidnap her. Um, but what they did was they lied about it. They caused a lot of the chaos that was going there. Could they have been working for the Big Lebowski, the rich one? Maybe, but it doesn't really go in to say that. Okay. Now, this is a very interesting thing. It's a notice thing that you may not pick up in this movie. But right after the nihilists come into Lebowski and they said they threatened to cut off his Johnson, which I just mentioned earlier, in the next scene, the dude Walter and Donnie are sitting together. Donnie is sitting in between them. Okay, so you have the dude is sitting on the left. I think. Yeah, I have to check it again. But I think the dude may be sitting on the left and Walter's sitting on the right and Donnie's in the middle. Donnie is drinking a soda and he's drinking Slice soda. Now that's a little joke because of course they threatened to cut off the dude's private area, okay, in there. So it's a little joke, but it's also representation. What it's saying is the 1960s it sliced America in half. It divided America. That's what it did. It divided America. And we're still seeing that division to this day. Okay? We still saw that division. And it took a lot to bring America back together. It wasn't until like someone like Ronald Reagan and George Bush and Bill Clinton that brought and won big majorities together, bringing liberals and conservatives together. But it brought America back. Okay? Now, here's an interesting thing that's kind of funny about it is during when the dude is sitting in the guy's cab and the cab driver's playing music, he tells him, "Can you switch the channel?" And the guy tells him no and gets very violent about it. And Jeffrey says, "I hate the Eagles." And they were playing an Eagles song. I can't remember the Eagles song. And earlier in the movie, they play Hotel California in the Spanish version of it. But they were playing the Eagles. Okay. Now the interesting thing about that is, what does the dude always say? He always is saying, "Take it easy, man." Well, what was one of the Eagles' biggest hits? Take it easy. Most people know that song. I was sitting on a corner in Winslow, Arizona. Most of y'all know that song, right? He says he hates the Eagles, yet he quotes them all the time. Take it easy, man. Take it easy, man. Take it easy. But yet he says he hates the Eagles. Okay? But here's my question for you. What animal is the representation of America? An eagle. An eagle is a representation. What it's saying is the hippies, they said that they did not like America. Is they wanted America changed. They created the Port Huron Statement and all of these, Students for a Democratic Society. Many of them were communists. They say they hate America, just like the dude says he hates the Eagles. It says, but they always quote their ideals. Oh, we get free speech. Oh, we have freedom of assembly. Oh, we have no illegal searches and seizures. We have the freedom of the freedom of religion. They're always quoting the stuff, and they're always quoting and saying stuff about America, but they're saying that they don't really like America and they want to radically change it, just like the dude wants to radically change the station that the guy's listening to. But you see, that's what he's saying. He's saying he hates the Eagles, yet he quotes the Eagles, just like the hippies. They say they don't like what America is, but yet they're always quoting the ideals of America. You see that? That's a representation in there. You have to pick these things up. Okay? The chaos of, you can see it throughout the movie too. There's chaos. The chaos of the 1960s is kind of played out like this. It doesn't seem that anybody really cares about law and order in this movie. Okay, just some examples. Just like how the hippies and the right wingers, a lot of people didn't seem to care about law and order. They were creating a lot of chaos with race riots and peace riots, and the Kent State massacre, the Jackson State massacre, of all this kind of chaos that's going on. Just some examples. The dude, he doesn't care about law and order because he parks his car in a handicap zone, even though he's not supposed to do it. Okay. Walter pulls out a gun on the bowling alley. That's illegal. The nihilists break into Lebowski's home and destroy it, and they destroy his car. They don't care about law and order. A kid, Larry Sailors, steals the dude's car. He doesn't care about law and order. The dude steals the rug from the Big Lebowski. The Big Lebowski didn't allow him to take that rug, but he wanted to take the rug anyway. He lied to Brandt and took the rug. Jackie Treehorn drugs the dude. The police chief of Malibu throws a cup at Lebowski. That's illegal. They can't do that. That's police abuse. He can't do that. Nobody seems to care about law and order. Walter jumps out of a car and his gun fires. Walter also randomly comes up to a car that he thought was this kid's car that he bought, and started destroying it, and it belonged to a neighbor. And then the neighbor comes in and randomly starts destroying the Big Lebowski's car. These two thugs break into Lebowski's home and threaten him, the dude's home, threatening him for the money, and he didn't seem to care about that. They didn't seem to care. They were breaking the law. Bunny's offering up her sex for money. She's offering her services, sex for money. Jesus, who's one of the guys, his name is, he goes by Jesus. His name's probably Jesus, but he's complaining about Walter serving on the Sabbath. He doesn't care about the Jewish law. He's like, I don't care about this. Walter brings a dog to the thing. You see, it's just like how the 60s, nobody seemed to care about law and order. People were killing each other. People were rioting. There were lynchings. The police in the South were, like cattle prodding people and turning fire hoses on them. It seemed like nobody cared about law and order. The only people that did, what happened to that? Richard Nixon came in and said, I'm bringing law and order to this nation, and he's appealing to the silent majority. And that's what it seems like. Donnie seems to be totally out of all of this. He's not really involved with this. He never breaks any laws. While everybody else is breaking laws, he's the only one not breaking laws. Why? Because he's the silent majority. The silent majority is the average American who pays his taxes, goes to work, goes to church, not breaking laws. You see? And not only that, the big Lebowski, he's, the rich Lebowski, he's breaking the law by money laundering. You see? He's breaking the law by money laundering. Okay. Now I want to also get into this similarities. There's just a couple more sections of this. I want to get you some similarities between the dude and the Big Lebowski. Both of them are actually bums. And both of them probably came from money because the dude said he was in college. Most of the people that went to college in the 60s to avoid the Vietnam draft, um, most of them, and they spent all that time in college, came from rich, wealthy families. He did not serve in the war. So he came probably from a rich family. He doesn't have the money, but his family does. Just like I talked about how the Big Lebowski, he didn't really have money. The money that he had belonged to his wife. You see, the money he had belonged to his wife, not him. Okay? So they're both bums. Both of them don't have money that is their own. Okay, the Big Lebowski has no money, but the rich guy also doesn't have any money. It belonged to his wife. Both of them, they both have the name both of them have the name Jeffrey Lebowski. And what they are, and they're both racist because he said, or the dude tells Donnie that the Chinaman, he called him a Chinaman, peed on his rug. Now that's a racist term for an Asian American. Even Donnie or Walters corrects him. He says Asian American. And then the Big Lebowski, when he goes over there, he says a Chinaman took his legs from him in Korea. So they both use the same term. They're the same person. Okay? And basically what they're a representation of is they are the fight between the greatest generation, which is what the Big Lebowski represents, versus the baby boomers. That's what it is. If you know anything about that, the greatest generation came back from World War II and in Korea, and they had children that were baby boomers, and the baby boomers and the greatest generation typically didn't see eye to eye with each other. Why? Because they were typically the greatest generation tended to be more conservative, more supportive of the war in Vietnam, while the baby boomers seemed to be a little bit more liberal and against the war, and there was a lot of clashes. They were very orderly, very disciplined. The greatest generation, while the baby boomers tended to grow their hair out more and be less disciplined and less everything, so they didn't quite see eye to eye. This is played out in several movies, like the movie Jaws. You see it between Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss. Um, and it's even mentioned in songs like the Mike and Mechanics song. What was that song called? The Younger Years, where it's a guy who he's basically a baby boomer who didn't see eye to eye with his father, which was the greatest generation. He wished that his father died, and he wished they could have reconciled and everything else. So that's really going on. Now, to complete this video, what I'm going to say is this: in the film, there's a scene where there is a kid. The Big Lebowski's car gets stolen. I'm going to end with this. The Big Lebowski's car gets stolen. Okay, it gets stolen, and what happens is the I'm sorry, not the Big Lebowski. The dude's car gets stolen, and when he was in the car, he happened to be looking down. He started looking down, and he found this homework piece by a kid named Larry Sellers, and he believed that when that this kid Larry Sellers had stolen his car. He was a kid, somewhere in high school, something like that. And they found his homework piece, and they eventually confront him with it, which ends up in a funny scene. But there's one thing that Larry Sellers, that his homework was. And the dude even mentions it. He tells him he's flunking social studies. Okay? What is social studies? It's the study of history. And what have famous people, I think it was either Russell Kirk or Edmund Burke, one of them said? It said, those that do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So what the Coens are saying, we better not fail this history lesson. What history lesson? In this movie, it was telling you the ridiculousness and what was going on in the 60s and how it destroyed America. So we better not fail like Larry Sellers was failing history. We better not fail history and not learn from the mistakes, because he wasn't learning history and he was failing. And if we don't learn history, we're going to fail again as a nation. And so that's what the Coen brothers have told you in this movie. And I hope you all enjoyed this in-depth look at the Big Lebowski as a retelling. This is my thesis. I want to know, what do y'all think? Share this video. Like my channel. And just share this and give me your thoughts in the comments. I'm interested to see. Do I have something right? Do I have something wrong? This is just my thesis. I'm not. I believe that the Coen brothers are a very brilliant group of people or brothers that put together movies. There's a lot in there. It just seems like a comedy, but it's more than a comedy. This is telling you it is just an allegory for the 1960s if you really sit down and look at it. Okay, I just thank you all for watching this video. Once again, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'll be producing more of these videos if you love history like me, like I do. And this is T Hot signing out from the Historian of Truth, saying, I hope you all have a wonderful day.